The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Howdy ho, everybody. Coming to you cordless from glamorous Minneapolis. It's Monday night, January. God, I'm pathetic. I'm just freaking pathetic. It's January 12th. Now, I'm trying to memorize all this stuff before we start. It's Monday night, January 12th, 2026. I'm Jim Peters, and welcome to another edition of Jim Peters at Night. This I remember. It's show number 309. Mark your scorecards at home. Our guest tonight is John Carpenter, a man you may not have heard of, but he's been, over the last 30 years, one of the most influential people in studying and researching the UFO phenomena, specifically alien abduction. If you don't buy any of this stuff, you should watch this. Now, we taped this yesterday afternoon. I usually don't like to tape things. We try to tape things a few hours before we air them, but it was the only day he could do it. So we taped it yesterday. So yeah. So he's coming on in a few minutes. And we're taking the rest of this week off. I've had this long planned. I'm taking care of some personal business, but also there's another thing too. I got a little announcement here. Starting next week, the show's going to be shorter. We've been clocking in at about 90 minutes for quite a while now. Basically, the entire run. We've had some 2-hour shows. We've had some 1 hour and 75-minute shows, but more or less, it's really funny how this works. We don't have to, we're not on broadcast. We don't have to hit a post time or anything like that. And I always wondered about this because I remember watching Dan Bongino, and his podcast came out to an hour, almost to the minute. And I'm looking at the timings. I'm thinking, well, no, it can't be TV because sometimes he's under a minute, sometimes he's over a minute, And I'm thinking, but it's just that. And it's really weird how this works out. There's a rhythm to doing this, and you just kind of get into it. And the vast majority of our shows are almost exactly 90 minutes long. And usually there's a short introduction like this. And there's an interview that lasts about 45 or 50 minutes. And then I do what's called the Gymcast, where I pontificate for about half an hour on stuff in the news, and then we close it up, about 90 minutes long. I've decided, after doing a little research and also studying some of our own numbers, that first of all, it appears from the fourth quarter podcast rankings came out, and the top 5 shows were all under 20 minutes long. Secondly, we've been posting shorts to YouTube and TikTok now for 2, 3, 4 months, and our shows, I'll be honest, only a few hundred people watch them. The shorts get watched by thousands. There's many, many more people who are watching the shorts that never watch our show. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of weird. Well, it's not weird because I've had this theory for a long time that the 3-hour podcast interview like that Joe Rogan does is a fad. That he gets away with it because he was first. I mean, Joe Rogan and Adam Carolla were, for all practical purposes, the first people in this medium. That's not really true, but they were the first people of any prominence. And it also bears repeating that both of them did shows for about 10 years before seeing a penny of money. Because they're until about 18 or 19, 2018, 2019, there was no money in podcasting. So, I mean, now they're both wealthy. Now it's a legitimate medium, but Rogan can get away with it. I think that this whole thing jumped the shark about 3-4 weeks ago when Sean Ryan had an interview with Hunter Biden that lasted 5.5 hours. He had a 5.5 hour podcast. Nobody's going to watch that. And if you are watching it, it's because you're unemployed. And that's the thing. Even the people watch Joe Rogan. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of bros, living in the family basement. I mean, they are. I hate to say that, but it's true. My cousin watched Rogan's interview with President Trump. That was 3 hours long. He said it took him 6 sittings to get through it because he's got a life. He's got a job. He's got a wife and kids. It's like you can't expect this. And also the other thing is, I'm really good at the interviewing part. I mean, everybody seems to think that. I think that. The other part, I'm professional. I'm okay. You know, so I've decided to break out. What was the Gymcast, the half hour of me pontificating, is going to be now down to less than 5 minutes. I'm going to do one single subject at the end of the show for a few minutes every night, and we're going to break that out into a separate thing called the At Night Daily Brief, and we're going to post that on YouTube and TikTok and the social media outlets and X as is. It'll be 3 or 4 minutes long. That's what we're going to do. And then the rest of the show, that should bring the show down to about an hour. And I think that's a pretty good length. I don't want to mess with the interviews. So, not much anyway. I mean, we got a pretty good rhythm going there too. So that's what's going on over here. That's going to happen next Monday, starting next Monday. Like I said, we're taking the rest of this week off. And then on Monday, our guest is going to be, and this is really amazing. This may not mean much to you, but I got to explain this. Taki Theodorakopoulos is going to be our guest. Now you're wondering, who the hell is that? He's a Greek guy. He's 89 years old, but in his prime, that would be the 50s and 60s, this guy was world famous. He was known simply as Taki and still is, Taki. He wrote a column for The Spectator in London for about 40 years called The High Life. Matter of fact, I think he just quit it a few years ago, I think. Really. He was basically a professional playboy. He ran around the world and got into trouble and wrote about it. He was kind of like He was kind of like the Hunter Thompson of his day, and I don't know if that means anything to anybody anymore either. Thompson was around the 70s and 80s. Taki was around the 50s and 60s. Well, he's still around. He's alive. He's going to be joining us from Gstaad, Switzerland. He has a book out, and it's very aptly titled. It's called The Last Alpha Male, and he is. So I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun. So that's on Monday. On Tuesday, the 20th, our old friend Niels Gravelius is back. This is going to be his third appearance on the program, or fourth. I can't remember. Private detective from Pasadena, California, and we'll talk about all the legal stuff that's going on. We certainly want to talk about the stuff going on in Minneapolis, and then there's this murder of this dentist in Ohio that got really weird. It turned out it's his wife's ex-husband or something like that. Anyway, the thing is, Niels is always entertaining, so that's going to be that. And then we are going to do a show on Wednesday next week. Haven't booked a guest yet. We're not going to be doing a show on Thursday. So, and then the following week, I don't know yet. I right now have that scheduled Monday and Thursday only. And I think we might stick to that. There's a lot of stuff going on over here. I'm only, like Regis Philbin said, I'm only one man. So that's our story. I'm sticking to it. But now here's a better story that you're going to hear about 12 seconds. Here's John Carpenter, alien abduction researcher. Take it away. Joining us from his home in Springfield, Missouri, psychiatric therapist and alien abduction researcher John Carpenter. You have a long list of credits, John, before you even speak at all. First of all, I got to ask you, is a psychiatric therapist and a psychologist and a psychiatrist the same thing?
No. Psychiatrist is a medical doctor who does prescriptions. Psychiatric therapist is actually, in my case, a clinical master's level social worker who's trained in, I spent over 30 years in psychiatric field. So that makes me a psychiatric therapist.
Yeah. But you're not a doctor then, an MD?
No.
Okay. All right. And so now this, this show's for general, basically viewership. So I don't expect the people who tune into the show to know much about the alien abduction UFO experience. But with Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and John Mack, you apparently were involved in that Roper poll from 1991, right?
Yep, and I
You
knew
want
all these guys very well.
you want to explain and no, please do not take offense to this, but you're like the least known of those four guys. You're like the four horsemen, but you're kind of like the guy that kind of and no one ever kind of talks about, but you were still part of you were the four horsemen, you were. So
Absolutely.
do you want to tell people what that poll was about?
The Roper poll was a way of asking people, first of all, if they believed in abductions and what their experiences were. And it was a way of then taking that information and training mental health professionals on how to deal with this to make it. We did Roper poll professional training sessions in Chicago, Atlanta, New York, LA, uh, you know, about 5 different major locations with easily up to 200 therapists in attendance from those areas. And this was back in the mid 90s. And we were determined to get everyone up to speed on the fact that this is a very real phenomenon. And people were experiencing what amounts to post traumatic stress, although they didn't know what the terror was. They just had all the symptoms of PTSD without knowing what the trauma was that they'd actually been through.
By extrapolation, you guys came up with some numbers on how many Americans have actually been abducted, right?
Pretty good guess. And of course, it always depends on how honest a person is and how legitimate their claim is. But we easily found thousands of people that felt like they had been abducted. And I'm sure there was a lot more that had no idea that they'd been abducted.
Yeah. Do you have any idea what the percentage is? I mean, you're right. It seems, well, first of all, it seems like the aliens involved in this do make an attempt to wipe everybody's memory, but that attempt doesn't always work. Do you have any idea how many people have maybe been abducted and have no idea they have?
That's a very good question. Um, all I can say is they're still finding people all the time that for years and years and years, they still don't understand why they react a certain way or feel a certain way. For example, I had 2 people that had phobias of falling up. Now, how in the world do you develop a phobia of falling up?
That's the strangest thing I've ever heard of. So how do
Well,
you?
under hypnosis, they realized when they had that experience that something was blue light was lifting them off the ground, and there was terror at the feeling of their feet leaving the ground. And so I had 2 different people that had that phobia. And it's just a great example of there's no other way you could probably develop that phobia other than being lifted off the ground in a mysterious way.
Yeah. So how did you get into this? What was your initial interest and what time? And
Well, I read my first book on UFOs in the 3rd grade. My brother had bought a book on it, and I'd followed stuff, even the Betty and Barney Hill as it happened. And I was only
hold it. I do have to ask you, John, forgive me, but in 3rd grade, what year was this?
Let's see, that would have been about 1963, 64.
Because that is pertinent, especially you're talking about Betty and Barney Hill. So that case didn't really become public till like 65, right?
Yep. I still have the original Life magazine article.
Yeah.
Betty and Barney Hill, but also Travis Walton and all those as it happened. I read about them, and my high school term paper was on UFOs, and the teacher was so impressed she kept it as a landmark paper for others to learn from in terms of doing research.
I have to tell you, I have to stop you, John. I also wrote as a senior in high school a paper on UFOs, and my teacher told me I was crazy. I got the opposite reaction.
Well, I think I converted my teacher. She didn't know anything about it. By the time she's done reading my paper, she was sold.
Well, I'm a bad writer, I guess. So, that's my problem.
And then I actually, in college, guess who came to speak at our college? J. Allen Hynek. And I got to meet him, shake his hand, get his little autograph. A short little guy.
Yeah.
But I had no idea at that time I'd end up be doing what I'm doing. So make a long story short, in the 80s, when the books Missing Time, Intruders, Communion all came out in the mid to late 80s, I got really interested because now I had been trained in the early 80s to do hypnosis as part of my profession at the Menninger Clinic in Kansas. And, uh, and so I was trained in hypnosis. I had background in psychology and psychiatric disorders. And here were these people that everyone was saying were crazy, but were having UFO experiences. So in the back of, I think it was Bud Hopkins' book, in the back of the book, it listed three organizations: Center for UFO Studies in Illinois, MUFON, and Bud Hopkins. And so I thought, oh, I should contact them and see if I could be of help because I'm interested and I have these skills. Nah, I waited a year.
Oh, yeah.
And then a year later, I did write them all. And it's interesting. Within 2 days, Walt Andrus of MUFON, the international director, calls me and signs me up right then and there as a state section director, which is for 4 counties around the Springfield area, and a research specialist in what I do.
Well,
And
stopping you for a second, I bet that you were kind of highly coveted because you were actually trained in hypnosis. The big
oh,
complaint about Bud Hopkins is that he used hypnosis regularly, but he was never formally trained to do it. I mean, people have always complained about that.
right.
You know? So here you were. So I figured they just saw gold, right?
Well, I think so because they didn't waste any time signing me up. But I had those titles and I had no clue what to do because I didn't have a group. I didn't have anyone to talk to in the area. So I started reading books. And about a year later, um, I started getting some radio and TV interviews. And I went to a conference in Eureka Springs where they have an annual UFO conference in that area. And then I started to meet some people. But I forgot to tell you, 2 months after I sent those letters, Bud Hopkins calls me at home and says, "Oh, I need to talk to you." And I'm just like blown away. Here's this famous author calling me at home.
Yeah.
So we talked for about an hour, and we're discussing hypnosis techniques and all sorts of things. And I took a few of his tricks and made them a huge part of my approach. And what I'm talking about is um, people say, of course, hypnosis is very suggestible and therapists are sloppy and can suggest answers to the clients and can, make them remember all these things that they didn't really remember and bring out all this detail by being, suggestible and not careful. Well, I did just the opposite. I suggested all the wrong answers, which were completely logical. For example, so you see yourself in some other place, no longer at your home. Look around the room that you seem to be in and tell me what's in any of the four corners of the room. Well, their eyes look round and round and round and round, and then they apologize and they say, I'm sorry, there don't seem to be any corners in the room. I knew that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's always a round room. But I'm asking a logical question. Now, if someone's making it up, they say, well, in this corner I see this, and this corner I see that.
Right.
But no, they stuck to their experience and said, I'm sorry, it appears to be a round room. There's no corners. So by them sticking to the truth and what they experience, they ignore my suggestion to find something in corners and actually present the truth. Now, I'll give you one more quick example. This is a double trick. So they see a creature, and so I say, well, when he opens his mouth and speaks, do you hear a high-pitched, medium-pitched, or low-pitched voice? And they stop, and they think. So, well, he doesn't open his mouth, right? And I don't hear it with my ears. It's like I'm hearing thoughts, but they never use the word telepathy. They always have this really cool way of saying it's like I'm hearing his words in my head, but it's not through my ears.
John, do you think that's because they don't know what telepathy is, or it's they don't associate it?
They just aren't using that word. These are just regular people off the street,
Right.
and they're just describing their experience, which again is more valid than if they said, "Oh, it's telepathic." No, they never ever said the word telepathic. They always describe what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. So I would just do this over and over and over, keep suggesting, "You're laying on a table. Why don't you jump up and run?" I can't. I seem just, you know, um, I just seem tranquilized. So,
Yeah.
over and over and over, I'll suggest normal reactions, typical answers. I'll use the power of suggestion, and they don't fall for it. And to me, that proves legitimacy, because if you think hypnosis is suggestible and it makes people say what you want them to say, I just proved it. It never happens when I am suggesting the wrong answers, from research and from experience.
So how many of these people have you done now? Hypnotized?
Oh,
A couple hundred?
it's about 300 hours worth, and over 100 different cases. Because some cases I might do as many as 10 different sessions.
Yeah.
So
Right. So
some just one session,
can
just
you
depends
tell
on
us, is there like a typical, like stereotypical experience? Is there? I
oh
mean,
yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
what is, can you go through it? What is it?
Well, pretty much they're pulled off the ground in a blue beam of light. They may have been floated out a window or through a wall or whatever. It's like they're in a different realm already. When the beings surround them, it's like reality disappears and they can go
And
through all
and
windows.
the typical beings are small grays?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some reptilians and a praying mantis, and maybe a few tall blondes, but most always it was the little grays and tall grays. Um, and so they'd float them out outside and then up in a beam of light. And then next thing they know, they're in a round room that's illuminated by a light source they can never find, but it's bright. And they're on a table or watching one of their friends on a table. And then there's some kind of maybe scoop marks or testing, sometimes a nasal implant, maybe some reproductive experiments. But the interesting thing was the whole time, the creatures are always sounding like a nurse in a doctor's office. "Don't move. It's fine. You'll go
Right.
home soon. Don't worry. This will be over quick. We'll have you home." But you won't think of it as this. You'll think of it as blah, 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 and give them some other way to remember it. And they're suggesting, a different image or a different experience. And then next thing they know, they're falling back into their bed or back into their car or wherever they were. And they don't know where the last 2 hours have gone.
So, I've done a lot of reading about this, and my impression is that for a lot of people, after the quote unquote examination's over, that the aliens will kind of warm up a little bit, and a lot of times say, "Do you have any questions?" Have you and because the questions people ask and the responses they get, if I had time, I'd write a book on just that, because it's absolutely fascinating what some of these people have said. Have you found this experience too, that some of your clients have actually asked them questions?
Yes, they have asked them questions. The aliens didn't usually offer to answer any questions, but sometimes they'd answer them. Sometimes they just look at them and walk off. And sometimes they would give them an answer. Like
Uh-huh.
one time someone says, "Are you gods?" And they laughed. And if an alien can laugh, and says, "Oh, no, we're just another race of beings like you."
Yeah, I read this one thing about this guy. He said he was abducted by like 8 foot praying mantis beings, and he said he asked them questions for 2 hours. And I don't know if you ever heard the story. And they answered all of them, except he did ask them, "Can you tell me about God?" And they said, "No, we can't." That's the only thing they didn't answer. They talked about the propulsion system, all that sort of stuff. He said he didn't understand any of it, but they did answer the question, you know. So what do you think's going on here? I mean, why is this happening?
Well, it's interesting because even though my sessions would pretty much be the same kind of thing over and over, and my assistant that would sit in with me and make notes, we would just look at each other like we knew what was coming next. We knew what was going to be said next. We could predict every move. But the people going through it would have 100 different kind of responses. I mean, some would feel enlightened and amazed. Some would feel traumatized and victimized. Others would feel spiritually evolved. And I said, it's like if you send 100 people to a movie theater and they all see the exact same movie at the exact same time, and then you interview all of them when they come out from the movie. Do you think they're all going to say the same thing? No. Some will say, I hated it. It was boring. Someone else will say, I loved it. It was my favorite movie. Someone else will say, I fell asleep. It was not interesting. So the human response and reaction can experience the same exact thing and yet come away with all these different reactions and responses, which then makes people think, oh, it's really evil. Oh, they're really going to take over the planet. Oh, they're just scientists doing experiments. And, so from my perspective, they were doing longitudinal studies on certain DNA strands, because I have at least several cases that are 4 generations. Now, and David Jacobs used to joke about, we talked about how do they pick certain people? How do they do this? And the best answer we ever got was what David Jacobs said. He says, there's one, get him.
But I'm sure that's true. I'm sure the vast majority of it's just random, right?
Well, you think if we go into the woods and we're going to tag a bear for study, what do you think that bear sees? A helicopter landing and these beings get out of it and then feels a sting and he goes numb. Next thing he knows, these beings are examining him and then tagging him with this little GPS tracker. And then they go off and he stumbles to his feet and sees the craft fly off. And he's mad because we didn't explain what we were doing or why we were doing it. And he goes in the woods and tells the other bears what's going on. And they're all going, you're crazy.
But you're right. But I do want to point out, I do want to point out that
different.
You're talking about that movie theater analogy, that if you're going to use that analogy, which is highly precise, I think, the movie's real. In other words, they're all seeing the same movie. And this is the reason I want to have people like you on, is I want people to understand this is actually happening. You can, like you said, you can talk about the reasons, you can talk about all sorts of, crap like that, why, benevolent, whatever, but it is happening. That's the thing that people have to understand. This is a real phenomena.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have no doubt.
So, but personally, do you have, all right, so let me rephrase this. What's on the benevolent scale? Where do you put this?
Well, all the researchers and I, Bud and Dave and John Mack and Linda Howe and, George Knapp, so many of us have discussed this. And, I think that they're studying us and they're trying to, maybe through hybrids, they're trying to bring back what they've lost. In other words, they have over-evolved. Picture if we sat in front of a computer staring at it, as we pretty much do now, for the next 1,000 years, our heads are probably going to get big, our eyes will get bigger, our bodies will atrophy because we're not using them. And we probably don't have a need for sex and those parts will atrophy over years because we're doing everything in the lab or, that way. We just control everything through technology and labs and everything. And we start to lose our human experience. Well, I think these creatures may have over-evolved, and because they're always interested in our emotions, how we react to things. They study our bodies and they take our reproductive elements, and I think they're trying to breed back in some of that stuff for their sake, not so much to hurt us. They do a very good job of trying to not bother our society and sneak in and out and tell us not to worry. And, if they wanted to take over, they would have done it 1,000 years ago.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right.
And the other think they're going to soon launch an invasion. That's science.
I come to the conclusion, John, that that on a daily basis, they're flying all over the earth. They're There's this, and there people say, well, how come so many of them crash if they're crashing? And I'm saying, well, yeah, if you got 100, all right, so we have 25,000 commercial flights a day in the United States, jets, right? We lose one jet every 2 years. Matter of fact, we lost one just recently. It was the first time in 4 years, which is considering how primitive what we're doing. We're literally pushing steel through the air. It's amazing how well it works. Well, if you're flying from 37 light years away, and probably from a mothership or something, but still, you're coming on Earth and you got all these little crafts. You're bound to lose something. I mean, it's just
and especially if you run into a lightning storm or something you're not used to, part of Earth's atmosphere, or
something you're not used to. I have a theory that because another thing, some of the ETs supposedly told some of the abductors is that our radar screws their navigation up, and that's because it's so primitive. They didn't even foresee it. That's the reason. That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah, just wait till we get to Mars and think we know what we're doing.
Well, all right. This is a little off topic, but I got to ask you. I think there's a very good possibility Elon Musk's company will get to Mars before the American government will.
Well, if they don't blow up 3 times on the way.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm still astonished they stuck that landing landing that booster on the very first try. I'm just looking at that. You got to be kidding. It just seems crazy crap, But
yeah.
I have a friend of mine who works at NASA, and he's told me, well, they're doing the Artemis thing now, but he told me this about 10 years ago. He said, there's no way in hell we could do Apollo now because the bureaucracy is so huge here, we couldn't do it, which I just think is terrible. Just sad,
Yep.
So now, getting back to what you're talking about like why this is happening. One of the things I've read, you were talking about over evolution. I've read that one of the captors, abductees, asked, why are you doing this? And what they got back was a question, and they said, what would the question was, the ET told them, what would happen if evolution was no longer your friend? Which plays into exactly what you're saying, So the other thing I have to ask you is where they're coming from. Do you think there's this theory that some of these beings, or maybe all of them, are future humans? Do you think that might be true? You don't?
No.
Huh? Interesting.
I'll tell you why. I mean, that's an interesting theory, but there's one big reason why that doesn't make sense. Leonard Stringfield, I met him and talked to him at length, and he told me a lot of stuff from his research. He was the guy that military people told secrets to. He had 650 independent military leaks, you might say, people telling him stuff. He told me there was at least 30 crashes and at least 30 bodies recovered. And he talked about one of the autopsies. And MUFON has a lot of this on record, by the way. You can read it. But I got to talk to him and interview him, and we were friends. He said that in the autopsy, the bodies were not like human bodies at all. They didn't have regular organs, no bones. It was very different kind of body. And he said it was more like a vegetable than a human.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
I'm under the impression, though, I mean, have you heard or do you know anything about this, is that it seems like we're starting to find out that the concept of DNA may be literally a universal construct, that it might be everywhere. Do you know anything about this, or do you have any thoughts on this?
That makes sense. I mean, animals have DNA. We have DNA. I'm sure any living creature has some kind of DNA.
Right.
But the reason why I think it's a longitudinal study, that means that these little scientists are studying a particular strain of DNA over generation. Like this is Betty and Barney Hill. Betty Hill's niece, Kathleen Martin,
She's been on the show. I've talked to her.
Involved. One of Linda Howe's famous cases, Judy Doherty, that was in her Emmy Award-winning special with Dr. Leo Sprinkle doing hypnosis. I got lucky 10 years later, and with Linda Howe filming, did the daughter, Cindy Daugherty, who never believed her mother and thought her mother was half crazy, did remember the UFO and all that, but didn't think anything really happened. And then in her 3-hour hypnosis session with Linda Howe filming the whole thing, she validated every single detail Judy had come up with and much more, including when Judy saw her daughter on the table and cried out. Cindy remembers being on the table and her mother being hysterical through a window.
John, could you explain this to me? Because I'm starting to think this is part of the phenomena, at least as far as here on our society. And that is, so you have a daughter here who says she saw the UFO but can't buy the rest of it. It seems to me part of the problem, especially when you come talk about, and we got to talk about this too, is what you call quote unquote disclosure, is there's a certain percentage of people that simply, for whatever reasons of their ego, religion, whatever reason, simply don't want to believe this. You can throw as much evidence in their face as you want. They're not going to buy it.
Sure. And the reason why is they'd have to change their whole view of reality, and it terrifies them.
Yeah.
I mean, people cling to a secure little world. They don't want things changing it. They don't want to have to think about different things. Like when I studied religious miracles, and some people were very interested, then they go, "Oh no, I can't believe in that because then I'll have to think that God's real, and I can't do that." And it's like, okay.
John, I have to tell you, when I have people on the show, when we talk about this, I always say, I can prove God's real. My proof, we're talking to each other. It's like, really, seriously, what do you think's going on here? It's like,
right.
I mean, it's really overly simple if you ask me, but whatever,
Let me tell you a little bit more. Not only did Cindy and Judy both saw a calf being lifted in the beam of light and mutilated on board the craft. I mean, that's a very important detail that now two witnesses had seen. And then I continued to work with Cindy by myself, and she had this phobia of dolls. She never could have a doll, wouldn't allow her own daughter to have dolls. And so we did a session that all of a sudden she saw this room full of hybrid children. And the hybrid children reminded her of those creepy old dolls, from the 40s or 50s, that
Right.
had the weird eyes. And because those dolls reminded her of what she'd seen on the craft with hybrid children, it set up a fear, and that's why she couldn't let herself or her daughter have any dolls. Well, guess what? Then her daughter started having experiences too. So there we have three generations: Judy, Cindy, and then Cindy's daughter. So right in front of me, again, a generational thing. And I call it a longitudinal study because that's when scientists do study something in the same genetic line over a period of generations. I don't know exactly why the aliens do that, but it makes sense because if they're good little scientists, they probably will follow something like that over generations.
Do you think we're being tagged, or do you think they have some sort of technology where they can literally read our DNA just from a scan or something like that, and they know someone's related to someone, or do you have any idea or any?
I'm sure they know how to do all that.
So now, and this is getting into the woods, but people watch the show know I'm getting in the woods anyway. The basic standing theory is that the little gray aliens and their tall gray overlords are from Zeta Reticuli, which is about 37 light years from Earth. So also that they're about 2 million years ahead of us. Is that basically what you've been able to put together, or do you care, or do you I speculate here because it's a talk show.
Well, I can't say 2 million years. I'd say they're definitely way ahead of us. And I think Zeta Reticula is one neighborhood, but I think there's a lot of neighborhoods. Yeah, I think we just got lucky to put a name to one of them, but I think there are so many places that these creatures can come from. And, it's sometimes more varieties than you can keep track of.
Yeah, I've got to backtrack a little bit here too. You're talking about David Jacobs. He has actually had in his writings, he has taken a more malevolent turn than you and most other people do. I mean, are you familiar with that, or
Oh yeah, that's just David. I mean, seriously, he always had that malevolent, evil, but that was his take on it. We didn't find anything different in the data to make us conclude that. I always tried to stay very neutral and just see what the evidence showed me. And like I said, it was more like the movie theater thing where I could see the same thing happening over and over, but the people's reactions would be all over the place.
So, okay, you've been involved in psychiatry for a zillion years. Why do people think differently? I mean,
What do they think are friendly?
it's a stupid question, but the thing is, seriously, why are some people afraid of this and some people not?
Well, again, the fear comes from not understanding, not knowing. That's what creates the most fear. We don't understand what's going on. Some people don't really worry about that. They just feel lucky that they were picked. They feel special. They feel, wow, I was part of an experiment. Wow, they chose me, you know? So that gets back to each person's personality, their background, their beliefs, you know, and that's why the movie theater has 100 different reactions coming out because people are so different in their backgrounds and experiences and personalities and preferences and fears and phobias and all of that. So people are too different. You know, you don't find two people alike very often, and they might be similar in their likes or dislikes, but you find people all over the board. And so you give them one thing like this, they go through, and some will call it evil, and some will call it awesome, and others will be curious and get into research. Others will want to put it away and forget about it.
Do you think if the president stands up at podium and says the extraterrestrials are here, do you think people will start jumping out of buildings if it happens like in the next 3 or 4 years?
Well, these days they probably say it's about damn time you told us.
Well, that's what I would think too. I mean, all the constant polling seems to indicate Americans are becoming more and more accepting of this phenomena, at least of it being real.
Well, they have much better specials on cable TV now, much better specials. I mean, George Knapp's got a series, and there's been a lot of very nicely done UFO documentaries with good evidence and witnesses and researchers. And, you know, we didn't see any of that when I was doing the research. In fact, X-Files wasn't even on yet when I was doing my research. Um, and I was glad because I wondered what people had seen or known before, and most people hadn't even seen a little gray before when I was getting
Right.
their drawings and stuff.
Right. It is ironic that in a lot of fields, the data is more consistent and more reliable pre-internet. You know,
Right.
I don't know, are you familiar with Ian Stevenson, who did those studies on reincarnation of little children? I don't know if you know if you're familiar with him, but all
I met him. I met him.
you did, huh? Yeah.
He was on Bob Bigelow's secret science panel,
Uh-huh.
which I got to lecture in front of in Las Vegas with a bunch of top people that some gave their names and some didn't. But uh, Jacques Vallée was there, and Ian Stevenson, and Hal Puthoff, astrophysicist,
Yeah.
and you know, others that
I
were.
was actually quite amazed when, man, I mean, this has been my line for 30 years. I've had people telling me I'm crazy, but then this whole thing with the Nimitz thing came out in 2017. I've been telling people that the American government has at least 9 crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft. And just about a month ago, maybe about 6, 8 weeks ago, Puthoff in a podcast interview, he said, "No, we have 10." And I was actually surprised he said that because I'm assuming he's under like 15 million security clearances, you know, but I was very surprised.
Well, and Leonard Stringfield said that we have 30.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
And that
said at
was,
least 9, right.
and
You know,
he said that back in '93 is when he
right.
said
And
we
I
had
was
30.
also going to say Stevenson died a few years ago. So this meeting you're talking about must have happened quite a few years ago, you know.
Yeah, it was back in '95.
Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah,
the thing
there are
I
also 2 astronauts, Apollo astronauts on Bigelow's science panel.
mhm.
Um, Ed, oh,
It's terrible. I can't remember his name.
Edgar Mitchell,
Yes,
Edgar
Exxon Mitchell,
Mitchell, and Harrison Schmitt, who was the geologist on Apollo 17. They're both in the room, and I'm lecturing to them
yeah.
about kind of a summary of UFO activity because Bigelow wanted me to catch them up on. You know, some of them knew a lot of stuff and some knew nothing. And so he wanted to catch them all up, and he picked me to give a slide presentation on the highlights of UFO research. So there I am giving Ian Stevenson and Jacques Vallée and two Apollo astronauts and others, my little lecture on UFOs.
Well, like I said, you're the unacknowledged fourth horseman. So it's like that's why I'm putting it.
I wasn't out to be famous or anything. I just kind of was because I was in the middle of it. I rode the wave, so to speak.
Yeah, you were in the right place at the right time too.
Yeah, definitely.
So, back to Stevenson though, the reason his data is so relatively prized is because it was completely pre-internet. So there's no way anybody could Google any of that information. And just to get the public, the viewer up to speed here, what Evanston did, he ended up. People were calling him because I don't know how he ended up kind of getting on this train of all these little kids who said they were someone else. And he said, I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to tell our viewers here that all these kids were under the age of 5. That was between the 3 and 5 years old. And they would tell mommy, well, this isn't my real home. And then Evanson would, and he did it in person. He would come and visit these kids and interview them and ask them very specific questions. What was your name? Where did you live? Who you were married to? What did you do for a living? What did you wear? Right. It was all sorts of stuff. And this is the 60s and 70s. And so these kids answered these questions. And he said in 70% of the instances, the information was actually real. But because the internet didn't exist, there's no way the kids could have gotten the information, or their parents for that matter, which is the irony is that because of the lack of technology, this information is actually more credible than it would have been otherwise. That's
exactly
interesting. Now, I have to tell you, I had a friend of mine who was on the show regularly. His name was Jazz Shaw. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was a UFO writer for quite a few publications, like The Debrief and all that sort of stuff. He passed away about 1.5 years ago, and he was connected to the Pentagon. And so he was telling me this when I heard, and you've probably heard this too. I've heard this, but he was telling me this directly. He said he had firsthand knowledge of it, that there's a struggle in the Pentagon because there's a certain percentage of the guys working there, I'll say guys, women too, who don't want to acknowledge the UFO phenomena because they think it's literally evil on a totally religious basis. I mean, these are highly religious people who think that this is literally the work of the devil. And you've done that's the reason I actually want to talk to you about this, because you've actually done some work on religious matters, religious paranormalism, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, people have often called some of the aliens, like the tall blondes, are actually angels. They're trying to make them that, or the little grays are actually demons. And no, I've studied both extensively, and it's two parallel, separate, set of things. They do not overlap at all. The aliens are another race of beings. Yes, they can be killed. Yes, they can have bodies. Yes, they can have injuries. Yes, their crafts can crash. They're not, indestructible or divine. Nothing like that. And true with demons, you don't need an exorcist to get rid of them. They just fly off. I mean, it's just not at all the same. But people will try to make it that way because they're trying to explain it. And like I said, when people have something that challenges their way of thinking, then they try desperately to fit into some box or match it up to something else that they think might be related. And you see this all the time with conspiracy theories and stuff, how they try to make something related to something else when there is no connection actually. So having studied both extensively, no connection.
Yeah, but the funny part, John, is I get accused of being a conspiracy theorist just because we're talking about this.
Well, I stick to the facts, and that helped me a lot because people said, "Well, what do you think this is?" And I go, "I don't know. I'm just gathering the information and seeing where it takes us."
Yeah, I got to admit, I do the speculation, and I do that because I just do. I had Stan Gordon on the show about 2 years ago, and he's doing mostly Bigfoot stuff now. But the thing is, and also I have a friend of mine who comes on the show regularly. His named Larry Newman. He's in Joplin, Missouri. I don't know if you know him. He works with the Bigfoot Field Research Organization. So Stan told me And, and actually, we should talk about this because it isn't actually off topic. He told me that, so he's talked to a million people, seen Bigfoot, and the thing is, and he said, and I've heard this from many other people too, that a lot of people have seen Bigfoot literally disappear right before their eyes. They're
Yep.
standing there and they're gone. And
Yep.
then the question is, well, first of all, is that really happening? And secondly, how the hell can that happen? My friend Larry thinks Bigfoot is just a regular undiscovered primate, and there seems to be a lot of evidence to indicate that. But I couldn't get Stan to extrapolate or speculate on what was going on. He just said no, and I gotta admit, I gotta admire him. He said, "I'm a journalist." He says, "I'm an investigator. I'm not going to try to pretend that I know why this is happening. All I know is this is happening." You know.
Well, there's a lot of dimensional portals, dimensional holes, you might say, and we've seen crafts fly in and out of them. On Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, they've had everything come in and out of portals, including a Bigfoot there.
John,
Was
have you
seen.
been there? Have you been there?
No, but I knew Bob well, and he told me a lot of stories.
I have to tell you, my friend Jazz, he was
Mhm.
invited to go there and he declined because he said, and I've heard this too, that every single person that goes there ends up taking some of the stuff home. I don't know if you've ever heard
Mhm.
that, you know?
No, and they have so much going on there. I wouldn't be surprised, but because they have, ghosts and paranormal stuff, and just there's all sorts of things. It's like a big gaping hole with a lot of dimensional things come through. Now, even back in the 60s, I remember reading stories where Bigfoot would disappear in a flash of light with a UFO nearby, and I've heard that several times. Um, I've heard of them disappearing, just right in front of your eyes, and appearing also in the same way. So I do think there's some kind of dimensional thing. They might be a type of creature that's been on our planet, but maybe also taken off our planet and brought back. I don't know. But there's something odd about that. Um, they definitely exist. There's plenty of evidence, and it never stops. And when
Yeah.
something never stops, something got to be something to it.
Well, Larry is a police investigator by training, and Bigfoot Field Research Organization, kind of like you with hypnosis. That's the reason they wanted him, is because he knew formal investigation protocol. And he said he didn't believe the Bigfoot thing at all until he was in the Ozarks in the middle of the night, pitch black. And he said we had a infrared camera going. You couldn't see anything, but through the infrared camera, he said he watched Family of Bigfoot for an hour. And he said after that he was convinced.
I would think so.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you like I said, you've also done some stuff on religious phenomena. And
Mhm.
and first of all, I have to ask you, there's a lot of people who think the near death experience and the UFO experience in terms of some sort of dimensionality might be kind of sort of the same thing. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Well, again, they're
See, this is the
they're
terrible
both
thing, John.
both supernatural.
I'm asking you to speculate.
No, it's okay. It's just that again, people try to blend two separate different processes.
Yeah, and I don't know if they should be blended or not. This is not a
No,
loaded question. I actually don't know.
because when you're with a UFO, you're still in this reality. You're just in their reality, on their ship and their existence, but you haven't left the Earth really.
No, but that's not really my question. My question is, okay, they may be in our reality, but can they leave? And when we die, do we go to another reality? I mean, that's really what I'm wondering.
Oh, absolutely,
Is there a separate
absolutely.
dimensional universe where all this other stuff is happening and they come here from there and then we go there? You know what I mean? That's what I'm
No,
talking about.
no, no, no. We're
No?
not going where they are. That's still in this earthly reality, even though it's their form of Earth. I mean, bodies are different. Everything's different. I have a book. One of my books is called "The Intense Reality of Eternity." And what I did is I consulted over 50 resources, and one resource might have hundreds of cases. So I did an extensive study of all the research and science and everything on near-death experiences, and plus I interviewed a number of people over my years who wouldn't want to tell anybody else because they thought they were crazy, but they'd tell me. So I'd hear the best stories, of course, and everything matched up. And so I thought, well, I can't do a book and just tell 200 stories. I mean, that would be tedious. So what I did is I went through and pulled out what people observed, like testimonies, quotes from their experience. Not what they thought it was, not what they assumed it was, but what they actually saw or experienced. And over a year, I collected this and collected this and collected this, and then I took all the quotes and had them in different categories. For example, like the gates of heaven. One person says, it's like a giant pearl. Another person says, it looks like they melted pearls and threw them at that wall. Another one says, it looks like they smeared pearlescent icing on that wall. And these people are all saying the same kinds of things in a similar way, but not with the same words. And
That's
what I did in my,
and
what
that's
I did
because
in,
it's an undescribable experience, basically, right?
right, they're trying to describe what they see, but they don't know what to call it.
Right.
And so what I did in this book was I took thousands of quotes and I lined them up in order so that you take one journey as illustrated by hundreds of people, because everybody has like a piece of the puzzle. So if you put all those pieces together, you're going to get a really full picture, and you're going to be amazed at how the details, even the tiniest details, like the grass is extremely green and seems to glow from within, and people were describing that over and over. I mean, you may not have even heard anything like that before, but here you have 15 people saying the same thing, and they could be from 5 years old to 80 years old. They could be Muslim, they could be Buddhist, they could be Hindu, they could be Islam, they could be Christian, and many atheists. For example, I have three quotes right back to back to each other. One is from an atheist, one's from a believer, and one's from a person blind since birth.
Oh
Listen,
man. Oh,
blind since birth, and they all three saw and described exactly the same.
that's mind blowing that somebody has never seen anything and then ends up dying and seeing something.
Right.
That's my. I mean, I've heard of that before, but just the fact that you've talked to something like that, I find that just incredible. That's amazing.
So my whole book is nothing but quote after quote after quote through heaven, through hell, and through purgatory. And that's because the evidence, I collected the evidence and followed it, and I put it all together. So instead of reading 54 books and thousands of cases, you get it all in one book, concise, to the point, and write each quote next to each other, taking you one journey illustrated by hundreds of people.
Is that book for sale, John?
Oh yeah, it's on Amazon.
I looked for your books on Amazon. I couldn't find them.
Well, if you put my name in, put John S. Carpenter. Otherwise, you'll get the movie director.
Yeah, that's probably what happened. I put in John Carpenter UFOs or alien abductions. I think.
No,
Yeah.
put John S. Carpenter, and better yet, just the title of the book.
What is that?
The Intense Reality of Eternity.
So now there's a lot of people who've had these near-death experiences. A lot of them say, first of all, that there's no such thing as hell, and then about 10 or 20% of the people that have them said their experience is actually negative. So, did you draw any conclusions regarding that?
Well, the people who deny God, make fun of God, and preach against God, they are often shown a glimpse of hell. Now, if they went there, they wouldn't come back, but they were shown things, or maybe stayed there for a little bit. And I tell you what, none of those atheists came back atheist. They're all believers.
Yeah, yeah.
And one was, I believe his name is Ibn Alexander.
Yeah, right. I know him. Yeah, he wrote a book.
Yeah,
right.
Proof of Heaven. And he had that very vivid. Huh?
Was he an atheist?
Oh, yeah. At first, he was this neuroscientist that didn't believe in any kind of spiritual stuff.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And after he went there, he said, it's as real as anything you can ever experience. And he said, and you can have science and religion. Absolutely. He says, I do now. And he was shown hell because he didn't believe in anything. And then he was shown heaven too. And then he came back. And so that's why he has powerful speech, because he didn't believe any of that stuff. And he came back fully believing, and he had all the credentials and science and everything to say, hey, this stuff is real, and you better believe it.
So,
I quote him in my book too. I mean, he's one of the quotes, many quotes from him,
Shall I extrapolate and think that maybe hell is literally the nullification of your soul, where you don't exist?
Well, hell is torturous. It's awful. But think of it like this: if you're a person who is like a thief or a rapist or something, and you hide in the darkness of night, and you don't want anyone to shine a light on you, you're almost like a cockroach that runs from the light into the shadows. um, Hell's going to look pretty good to you because it's dark down there and you can hide well, and you don't want to be in the glorious light of heaven where everybody can see your sins and everything, so some people are actually more comfortable being down there, but it's not a pretty sight, and it's not a party, and it's not anything nice, but it's for people who reject God and who deny God. Now, if people aren't sure or whatever, that's one thing. But if you go out and preach against God, or you even see God and you like spit at him, I mean, that's not going to get you anywhere.
No, I probably not.
I
Okay.
had this in my book. I had this Jewish woman, and she goes, "I don't believe in Jesus, but he's standing right over there, so I'm going to start. I'm going to start believing."
All right. So let's before we go here, let's actually transfer here to the religious aspects of this. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with this thing about this story. It's highly apocryphal about President Eisenhower meeting with the gray aliens in 1954. So
Yes.
there's another part of that story, which is basically supposedly the end of that meeting. And there's a lot of people in the military who are devoutly religious and devout Christians, and they had no trouble meeting with the aliens. They had no trouble with that at all. But apparently they had real problems with two things that aliens said. One was at the end they said, well, there's a race of extraterrestrials that look identical to humans, and that completely freaked the military people out because they realized, well, they could be walking, they could be in the restaurant and we never know it. But the other thing is, supposedly the gray aliens told them, they said, you know that thing about your Savior Jesus Christ rising from the dead? We did that. Are you familiar with this at all?
Oh, I heard that last one, but I didn't have it. There was not much credibility in that. No.
Well, okay, so I got to transfer this. You got another website, and you wrote an article which I find actually fascinating about the Shroud of Turin. And so this thing, and you also brought up the fact, I think is very important, about the one test done on the shroud, the carbon dating was completely screwed up. As a matter of fact, do you think there's any chance they actually deliberately did that test to come up with bad evidence? Do you think?
No.
You don't? Okay.
I think it was just sloppy.
Sloppy. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But
They're supposed to take 3 samples from 3 different parts of it, and they took it all from one area because they're probably lazy, and that happened to be a repaired section.
right.
It was not the original cloth. So
right.
they've tested since then, and it has tested out, correctly.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they tested since. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I know you brought up one thing about this thing that's intensely fascinating about the fact that basically it's not only can no one figure out how the image got on there, there's no dyes or anything like that sort of stuff. It's like they can't figure that out. But basically, I'm gonna, for lack of a better term, there's a holographic image embedded in the shroud. That's
a good way to put it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And like you said, this was 600. This was at 2,000 years ago. How in God's name? First of all, you couldn't. How did they do that? And secondly, you'd only reason you do that is for somebody to find it like a million years later, like us. Isn't that true?
Well, I don't know if anyone did it on purpose. I think when Jesus passed through the cloth, his energy left like a image, an imprint, so to speak. They said it's more like a radioactive or nuclear energy passing through something and leaving a burn print.
And you also brought up the fact that it's like he didn't like get up and fold the cloth over. He literally passed right through it. His body
went right through it.
Right, which also embedded the image, and also goes along with what the apostles said about the fact that they found the cloth just laying there. It was not like somebody got up. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And let's end with this. So it appears that the Vatican is trying to get out ahead of the extraterrestrial situation. I mean, I don't know if you've been following this. In 2017, the chief astronomer of the Vatican, he said he acknowledged the fact that in the Vatican newspaper that extraterrestrials might be real. It's obvious that the Pope either instructed him or let him do that, because there was no particular thing that prompted it. And even recently, was it Pope Francis or something addressed it or something? I think they're concerned that people might abandon the faith if they find out this is true. But I mean, first of all, do you think that's true? I mean, do you
No.
think?
I mean, I don't think that people are going to abandon the faith. If anything, they'll become more religious. Just like when 9/11 happened, more people were in church than ever before. I mean, when something big happens, people tend to fill the churches, not run away from them.
And I'm going to ask you your opinion here. So, does Jesus end up saving the sins of just humans, or everyone in the universe?
Well, you'd have to ask him.
Yeah, that's a good answer, John.
Yeah,
Maybe I should.
Unless I had evidence, I won't have a comment, because I don't have any evidence for that. But I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe he appears as somebody different to another civilization.
Well, that's what I'm going to say. I mean, does every species have their own Jesus?
They might.
I don't think there's anything. What's the word I'm looking for? Hypocritical about that. But some people might. I don't know.
Well, maybe we're just special.
And Don, let's leave it at that, okay? It's been fantastic talking to you. I really appreciate this a lot. I really do. I hope you come back. If you have anything announced, you got a little. You sent me a list of your books, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, I couldn't read it, so that's why I went looking for them. So, if you got a new book out or anything, please let me know, and we'll have you on. I'd love to talk to you again. Okay.
Well, I have 5 books I wrote in 9 years. So
yeah. Why don't you send me the list again, and I will put them up on our blog. Okay. All right.
I'll do that.
Thanks for talking to us, sir. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. Mr. John Carpenter there. My God, that was fascinating. It's like we went overtime. I love talking to the guy. Loved hearing. He's like been on the inside and on the ground on this thing for like 35 years, as he said, and he's talked to everybody and knows everyone. So, and I can't stress this enough. You might think this is all bullshit, but this stuff is happening. Okay, there's too much proof. There's too many witnesses. There's too many people. I had a friend of mine who said, well, all these people are lying. Like he said, hundreds and thousands of people, they're all lying. No. And I also really appreciated the fact he shared with us his little trick of getting people to basically confirm their lack of confirmation bias, where he would actually inject into the hypnotism sessions stuff he knew wasn't true, and they would discount it and correct him. It's really crazy. All these stories are pretty much the same. That's the problem. But at any rate, enough about me. You don't need to know that. Now, I explained at the intro here that starting next week, this part of the program, which used to last about a half an hour, is only going to be about 5 minutes. I'm going to talk about one single thing every night at the end of the show. And tonight, this is actually a very good segue, and a very good segue into that. And that is Eric von Däniken, the guy who wrote Chariots of the Gods. God, I can't talk. In 1968, he passed away this weekend at the age of 90. Now, he basically promoted what's now called the ancient astronaut theory of archaeology, where there's the thought that's in some instances maybe extraterrestrials helped out primitive man with certain projects, building stuff, and all that sort of stuff. And he wasn't the first person to come up with this theory by any means. He's not the first. There are many books written about this before he did. But his book captured the public imagination. I think it's partly because he was such a good writer. And also he was not like a lot of people. He was able to relate and express to the average person a concept that they weren't familiar with. That's one of the things like when talking to John Carpenter here and other people, when we have these, for lack of a better term, paranormal guests on, there's always the assumption that people know what we're talking about, and I know a lot of you don't. I know that. I try to keep that in mind when we do these interviews. I often stop and say we have to explain this to the viewer or whatever, but I know even I am subject to this. So, but Von Daniken really did seem to capture the public's imagination. He went on, he wrote that book in 1968. In 1974, 6 years later, I did a book report on it as a senior in high school, and I got a C, I think it was. The teacher said I was nuts. I just want to point out that guy, that teacher, he ended up going to jail for having sex with a student, so that's fine. Yeah, good for him. I hated his guts. He was just a jackass, and he was still to this day. I mean, how long has it been? 50 years? He's still a jackass. So, yeah, but that was my introduction to this. I was interested in this topic before I read that book, but it was still kind of really enlightening to me. And let's be honest, a lot of Von Daniken's theories were actually kind of wacky. They were, there's a lot of it. I don't believe the extraterrestrials, aliens helped build the pyramids. I don't believe that. There's a lot of stuff, but there seems to be probably a kernel of truth of what he's talking about, especially when it comes to the American Indians, who have always said, I mean, the Hopi Indians have always said that people from the stars visited them, and they're very intent on that, on getting that across. They're very what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, Von Daniken passed, and he's in some ways he's responsible for the modern UFO movement. And like I said, not everything he said made a lot of sense. A lot of it was sensationalistic, and he probably said a lot of it to sell books. He sold 63 million books during his lifetime. And yeah, Chariots of the Gods made him a very wealthy man. Before that, he was a hotel manager in Switzerland. And he was actually not even a trained archaeologist. He was basically a hobbyist. So his book captured the imagination like all the others before it about the same subject didn't. And I think that's because he was not an academic, and he wrote for the average person, which, I'm trying to do that here. I don't know if I'm succeeding. So about all sorts of stuff too. I mean, I don't assume that, I mean, no offense, I'm not trying to say you're stupid, but I don't assume that you know a lot, because there's too much to know. There just is. Even keeping up with the news is mind-boggling. It's like a full-time job, and it is for me. I mean, I spend hours a day reading the news, just to do this. So, anyway, so yeah, like I said, starting next week, this is gonna be about 5 minutes long here at the end, and we're gonna break these out into separate separate videos on YouTube and TikTok into shorts, so that, because I said this in the introduction. Well, we've come to the conclusion. We post these shows. The average show we've been doing up now is about 90 minutes long. And maybe a few hundred people watch it, but we post 4-minute shorts on TikTok. Thousands of people watch them. It's unbelievable. And also, as I mentioned previously, I'm going to repeat myself, but I'm going to. The trend seems to be in shorter podcasts. The top 5 podcasts last in December were all under 20 minutes. And Joe Rogan aside, I think that was a passing fad because he was first. That's what I think. So anyway, so yeah, this show's going to end up being about an hour long. We're going to cut about a half an hour out of it. And our guest on Monday, the 19th, is Taki. Oh God, I got to look because I can't ever pronounce his last name, even though nobody uses it. It's Taki Theodorakopoulos, known as Taki. And he's a Greek guy. He was extremely famous in the 50s and 60s worldwide. He wrote an article, a column for The Spectator out of London called The High Life, and he lived the high life. I mean, he was basically a professional playboy. But he did a whole bunch of really cool stuff. He started the American Spectator magazine with Pat Buchanan. Let me see what I got here. he founded his own magazine, Tacky's Magazine, in 2007. It's still running. It's at tackymag.com, TAKIMAG. And it's pretty entertaining. He's 89 years old. He's going to be joining us from Switzerland. He was supposed to be on tonight, but it turns out because of the Switzerland thing, we had to figure out how to do that. And so we put it off a week. So anyway, and then on Tuesday, the 20th, our old friend Neil Gravelius, LA private detective, is going to be joining us. So we got all sorts of stuff to discuss. We got this stuff going on here in Minneapolis. We got the dentist murder in Ohio. It's like Nils is always entertaining, always has a fresh take on stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing him too. We're taking the rest of this week off. I got personal business, but like I said, it's partly to get our shit together. We're basically revamping this starting next week. So I really appreciate you watching very much. Thank you I mean, it means the world to me, and I really appreciate it. And I'm terrible about this. If you get a chance, subscribe to our show. I would suggest either Rumble or YouTube. The thing about getting the show down to under an hour is then we can post it on TikTok, because you can't post videos on TikTok over an hour. So that was one of the things that factored in this decision. And so, the show will be on TikTok now. Up till now, we've been running only shorts there. But starting next week, we're going to be posting the whole show on TikTok. So, thank you. Really appreciate it very much. Good night, Uncle Donnie, wherever you are. Good night to you, wherever you may be. You guys have a nice week. I'll see you next Monday, the 19th, with Taki, which should be just incredible. Take care. Bye-bye.